is about to
It's a
begin.
depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. We know the air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat. You don't go out anymore. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. There's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my... I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. At first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Testing. Sound check. Testing. Naglolo ko ata ang restream. Good evening. So, hopefully may nakakarinig sa akin. Kung may nanonood man, hopefully may audio tayo tsaka may video. Not sure kung naglo-load ng maayos yung screen. Hindi yata nag-play yung intro natin. So, I don't know. Today is Wednesday, September 7, 8:44 in the evening. Testing. Let's see kung tuloy-tuloy pa rin. So I'm not sure kung may nakakakita sa akin. I'm not sure if I am broadcasting right now. Hopefully I am. Wait lang. Hingi lang ako ng update. If not, I'll just take it down. See. Testing. Confirmation, may nanonood ba? May nakakita ba? Check. Ayan, chine-check ko sa... Wala, may delay kasi yung Facebook so I'm not sure. If you can, pa-comment naman kung may nanonood. Hindi ko nakikita na dati may indicator pa kung may nanonood. Hopefully, you can hear me. Kung may nanonood man either from Facebook or YouTube. Yun. Good evening, Daddy Dens. Kamusta yung audio? May audio ba? May pumapasok na audio tsaka video? Parang naglolo ko yung restream Hindi ako parang hindi ako maka-broadcast for some odd reason. Thank you for watching, Daddy Dens. Thank you for visiting. Okay. Tingnan natin. Yun. Thank you. Thank you for confirmation. Okay. So ito, panata na natin. For this evening, we're just continuing with yung pre-recorded video na in-upload ko. I uploaded a short article about history. Tapos kanina, earlier this evening, bago kami mag-dinner, si Bugay had I think it was an assignment. She was asking about yung La Solidaridad. So from there, we had a conversation about history, why we have to study history, what was the purpose. What's the whole rationale about it? Why do we have to bother with history? Is it really necessary? Is it important? Is it relevant? Why do we even bother with history? Is history simply written by the victors? Is history like fact or fiction, or is it a fictionalized version of facts? Hopefully we can try to make sense in my own way. Let's try to find out why history is important, why we have to understand, at least why we have to have that careful conversation with time. So again, I am not an expert. This is just a disclosure. Not an expert. I never claim to be a particular expert about a topic or a subject that that I choose to talk about. I'm not a historian, but I am trying to be at least a journalist, at least have some credibility in what I do and also what comes along with it. Kasi when you're part of something other than yourself, at least it brings in not necessarily credibility but a sense of responsibility. It's no longer going to be out of just a need to do something. It's just not because you want to do it. It's because it has to be done. Comes with a sense of responsibility. So hence, that's why I'm planning to at least earn that in one way or the other. So going back, history. One moment. So history. When we say history, some say there are a lot of a lot of misconceptions, misuse, and then there's a lot of negative connotations sometimes. And lately, history has become offensive. um, I just don't understand the rationale about it. I don't see any reason why it should be. If we try to look at where the word itself came from, if I'm not mistaken, it's from Historia. I think it's Latin. We can find out, but I don't want to Google right now. I think Historia originally means inquiry, to inquire, to know, to find out. So it's basically this. It's a conversation. My story, my interpretation, my opinion of certain events, a particular time that I have personal knowledge of. So we have people that have that heavy responsibility, that heavy burden of documenting the past. Why is it necessary? Why should we be wasting our time with the past? Good evening, Sir Jet. Good evening. So, good evening, Vernell Sweet Dreams. Good evening. So, looking at it, history is important. Why? Because this is the foundation of everything, if we relate it to, since this is supposed to be uh, a motivational channel, if we relate to it, if we relate it to our own life, we have to be aware of our past. We have to understand our own past. We have to look at the things we have done, however painful they may seem, however misinterpreted by other people our actions can be, or our reasoning can be. We have to face our own story. We have to look at our own story. That's why, if you're familiar with Dr. Jordan Peterson, he always asks you to write down your own story. You have to write down the good, the bad, and everything in between. You have to put in your own words your story, your history. And then you are asked to write down the course of your life up to the next 5 years. They say it's goal setting, they say it's visualizing the future. So how do we do that in general? How do we look at the history? We have to take both sides of history. We always have to be unemotional of history. If we look at recent events or recent stories that have been floating around, let's say politics. Let's touch politics. Why not? So if we if we discuss history in politics in Philippine context, there's going always to be the hero and the villain, the good and the bad, and then what's in between. If we look at the progression of the story without emotion, we can say the Aquinos have done good in our country. If we look at history as it is written, they are the heroes of the country. They are the ones that liberated us from the oppression of Ferdinand Marcos, the martial law era, so and so. Now, when we go down the road of oral history, the unwritten history, we will see other people will say something else. They will say the Marcoses can be considered or should be considered as heroes. They should be part. They should be discussed as the one that developed the country, freed us from a time of anarchy, a time of unbelievable and what's the right word? I'm sorry, I'm just looking for the right word. I'm not trying to put like flowery words on it, but I'm simply just looking for the right word to describe it. Um, they were they put a stop to a time of anarchy. That's why martial law was imposed at the time. So again, I'm not an expert. This is just my opinion. There was a time of upheaval during the time because there were certain groups, certain organizations that were trying to put up a government in form of a revolutionary government. At up until now, they're still present, they're still here. There is still a rebellion, an active act of terrorism. It's not a rebellion anymore. It's a terrorist act. So this also relates to our history further down the line. We'll try to go back to the Marcos era, but we'll just try to go further down the road. In the past, history, our history during the Spanish oppression, our 300 years of oppression in the Spanish era, we have two sides. We have people who wanted us to be integrated, and there were people who wanted us to be free. That's why there are people who say that Andres Bonifacio should be the national hero instead of Jose Rizal. Jose Rizal was somebody wanting to be integrated along with his other companions. They did not want us to be separate from the Spanish rule, the Spanish government, or the Spanish kingdom, or however you would like to call it. Their organization wanted us to be assimilated, to be accepted as equals. Now, that is a different story from liberation. That is a different story from wanting to be a separate entity. That's why, like others, would rather have Andres Bonifacio as the national hero because he was asking for something else. He was asking for total freedom. He was asking to be free of that yoke, not to be under the thumb of the king of Spain. So there are a lot of sides to every story, history. That's why we have to be very careful where we take the stories we use. That's why we have to be very careful with our interpretation or our preconception before we even decide on which story we're going to, let's say, write, talk about, discuss. Yes, we have to take a side at some point. Yes, we have to pick a side. You have to choose a side. But before you do that, you have to look at both sides of the story. You have to look at the facts. That's why, in order for a historian to be credible, they should be impartial from influence. They should not be they should not be affected, or they should not be controlled by either side of the story, the either side of whoever they are talking about or whatever they are talking about. As a historian, you should have that sense of responsibility that facts as they come, however, if you would not want to or not agree with it, you should put it down. You should write it as it happened. Because if we look at stories, if we look at history, there are a lot of stories that we can cite as an example. Let's try. Just give me a second. If we look at um, a well-known story, the what's this? The pyramids were made by Jews, even though there were no Jewish slaves at the time, because there wasn't any what's this? There's no Jewish nation at the time. So these are some of the few historical facts that have been. I don't think it's right to call it outright false, but it was molded by an agenda or a reason at the time. So to make a story interesting, because history basically can be very boring. So some people have to add a little spice to it. They're treating it as food. So they needed to put a little flavor to it, maybe leaning towards their own motivation, leaning towards their own agenda. That's why we have to be very wary of it. So that's one of a very popular myth. And then also, are we using history for entertainment, or are we basing our history from entertainment? Because sometimes there are certain stories that would be presented in movies that would be pre preambled or pre-introduced as based on a true story. Yes, it was inspired by, let's say, certain events, but not everything would be as is. Going back to going back to a point of view of history through our own life, through our own lens, how accurate are we with our own relaying of our story? When you tell the story of your life, not necessarily like a complete autobiography, but more of in casual conversation, would you tell everyone brutally, honestly, everything about yourself? The good, the bad, the sad, everything? Would you tell them about your entire story? Or would you tell them enough so that you can get their attention? Number one. Secondly, are you fitting that narrative of your story to present you in a good light? What is your agenda? Let's use the word agenda because it is why you're going to tell a particular part of your story without the whole picture. You're trying to put yourself in a particular context that you want people to see, only to see. That's why very few people would like to be in public, like in complete transparency. Very few people have the balls and the audacity to do that, to be completely honest, not necessarily with their whole agenda, because there's also a reason why someone would love to appear like an asshole, even if they're not, because it's a portrayal of themselves. It is a part that they are trying to play. It is the image that they want to show. Good evening, Sir Jayman. Good evening. So I'm putting this in my own terms, in my own words. So pardon pardon me if there are going to be any inconsistencies or any holes that you would like to dig through, but you're more than welcome. Now, when we try to approach history, we should be very careful with how we perceive. Just like when we interact with people, it's treat history as a person. How much do you really know about this story? How well do you really know about the story, about him, his story? There's there's a quote that has been attributed to Sir Winston Churchill. Uh, you know, history is written by the victor, but there's also people that says he never said it, or he did not do that, or he did not write that himself. But in any case, it is true, history is written by the victor. Set as a wonderful example. Again, we now go back to the Marcos era. For more than what, 30 years, give or take, their story has always been a different story. They are as It's been a story of atrocities. It's been a compilation of story of murder, violence, a story of abuse of power, a story of corruption and all that, because the victor was the enemy, right? I mean, we have to look at it, we have to look at it that way. Their opponent won, so that's the story. Now, if we ask a few people from the past that lived in that particular era, sadly I'm too young at the time. I was what, they got taken out of power 1986. I was what, 5 years old. So I am not a credible source of information. But if we ask the people who were mature enough at the time, they would share stories about, of course, there were abuses of power, but not them directly, not their family directly. But since you are at the top, you would be held responsible for all the actions of the people below you, right? So I think hopefully in the next few years, we would be open, not necessarily to directly accept, but respect whatever story comes out, whatever information comes out, not only about the Marcoses or the Aquinos or whatever. I think it's about time we be impartial to history altogether. I'm not really just focusing on the Marcoses, but also in our own history. We have to ask ourselves a deeper question. Are we simply asking for assimilation, acceptance, or do we want to be free? How would we define free? How would we define freedom? How would we define that? Where do we want to be free of? What do we want to be free of? Good evening, Ma'am Abby. So these are certain questions we have to ask of ourselves inwards. So first off, what's our history? My personal history, your personal history. What are the things that you haven't been open about to talk, even to yourself? Things that you're hiding under the rug, or things that you have been omitting, keeping in the dark, like mushrooms being fed shit and darkness. So that there are certain things we have to be willing to open so that we can integrate it, learn from it, and then make use of. We have to be able to take advantage of our weaknesses, our failures through learning. We have to be able to do that, whether we like it or not. It's going to be our best way of learning and improving of ourselves. So I know I'm trying to put together two things that seem to be unrelated, but it is very well related. If we can look at both sides of the story and be able to respect it enough to listen to it, not necessarily accept it altogether, but at least understand it. There's no requirement of you accepting it. It's just a matter of respecting it enough to listen to it. Your own dark history, your own dark story, and everyone else's. We're not perfect. There are certain failings of ourselves that we have to learn from. And if we apply that to ourselves, hopefully we would be able to apply it to other facets, like other people. Hopefully we can understand, we can approach them with respect. We come from a place of listening, we come from a place of understanding, instead of the need to have them follow suit, or the the need to have them bow down to us. Have you even bowed down to your own darkness? Have you communed with your own sins, as they say? So in terms of religion, it's the same. There's history in these pages. And then, of course, there are going to be false narratives that were written to keep them relevant, to keep them interesting, to keep hold of people. So you have to be careful of that as well, and be willing to accept also the point of view of others when they speak of these things. Let's not be too overpowered by our zealousness in our own perception of the world. Not everybody shares that. Your perception is unique to your own experiences, your culture, your understanding, your education, and everything else. Very few people would be able to see through your own eyes. It's highly unlikely someone will be able to see the world as you see it. everyone would have their own interpretation, their own understanding. And that's why, as we write down these stories, as we compile these stories, we have to be critical about the facts, the sources, and how we present the facts. Because sometimes that's where the danger lies, how we are presenting the information. Sometimes our own opinions would cloud the facts. For the most part, I think I I don't want to use the word blame. I'm not sure if there's a better word for it. Is there? Is there a better word? I can't help but blame mass media. I can't help but blame news organization, something like that. I can't help but, yeah, I think that's the right word. I can't help but blame mass media of the past 10 years for a lot of distortion in history. It it became a ratings war. It became feeding that hunger of relevance, feeding that hunger of attention, keeping people watching. First, it was television in order to keep people tuned in to that particular network or channel or whatever. This applies in general. They had to make certain things interesting. They had to add certain flares, certain personalities through the course of presenting their news. And then what kind of news was being presented? It became tabloidish in a way. We've been inundated, we've been flooded with stories of murder, mayhem, chaos. War even became like a daily part of our news coverage. I think the Iraq war, Kuwait Iraq war was the first full network coverage war at the time. And they were already adding their own thoughts, their own opinions, presenting them as facts at the time, dividing people, dividing a whole nation about it. I can't blame them also because it's a business. It's a business. That's why I think if you're familiar with, I think it's an HBO TV series, Newsroom. Um, I'll 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 add a link somewhere, maybe on Face or the Facebook page. I'll add a link there about it. We have to go back at least a few steps from where we are now. Let's just take a step back. Whatever you're going through right now, whatever it is, just take a step back. If you're considering something drastic, if you're feeling you're lost, if you're feeling if you're feeling too tired of continuing moving forward, just step back a little. Step back. Take a deep breath. and review your history. Try to understand how you got to where you are now. Because there may be a part of it that will answer your question, what do I do now? Hopefully, there was some sense to this jumble of words, this jumble of thoughts. Like the title says, it's random thoughts. So be the victor, write your own history, but be willing to write the complete story. Write the complete history of yourself. Don't omit anything. There are going to be a lot of things you may be ashamed of, but that's where your grit will come from. These failures. Hopefully, these failures will show others the way to answer their failings as well. Most of the time, why we feel depressed is we feel alone. We feel like there's no one else out there that's going through what we are going through. The circumstances may not be exactly the same, but we do go through basically the same thing. We're not alone. We're what, 7 billion or 8 billion people now inhabiting the planet. Yes, I can understand that you can be alone in your own thoughts. Yes. Yes, I can understand when you say that you are alone, even if you are in a room full of people. Yes, that's true. But that's of your own choosing. You will only be truly alone if you choose not to share yourself, if you are unwilling to share yourself. If you have been omitting certain parts of your history, no one can really share your world. Just like in relationships, you have to be open with your history between the two of you. It has to be a complete fusion of your story and your partner's story. We have to be willing to share so that we don't become alone. So thank you very much. This is 43 minutes. I don't want to take too much more of your time. I really appreciate those who have continually supported this endeavor. Maraming salamat sa lahat ng mga tao. Daddy Dens, thank you very much. Nagkakilala lang kami ni Daddy Dens dito. Pero we were able to commune, break bread between us in real life. Hopefully, I will meet others as well in the course of time. What's in store? Bagong studio, bago lahat, bagong bahay. Pero of course, I have to be willing to admit na this might not be for long. Uh, Hopefully, I would be able to find a way to support the channel further. Kasi from April, yes, April of this year, we still haven't been able to get yung a steady row of income. Yes, there are some online freelance work, pero still not enough. Hindi na katulad nung dati na I can just do this like every day. Hopefully, I will be able to find something to supplement this, to continue this as it is, hopefully. So, in parting words, thank you for the continued support. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much. And I hope, as usual, that you and your family stay safe and well. Hopefully, there was some sense in the last, what, 46 running minutes. Hopefully, I was able to at least talk some sense. And that's it. Life is about making choices. You can choose to write a tragedy, a comedy. You can choose to write however your history would be. I can only hope when you write it, you'll be honest. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful and safe rest of your evening. Good night.
Is everybody in?
Before we get started.